Ground it. 2 words. My voice did not shake, even though the left side of my face was still burning where her hand had landed. On the other end of the line, my chief operating officer went silent. I could hear him breathing. Then he said the thing people always say when they think you have lost your mind. Naomi, think about what you're doing here. I looked up at the woman standing over me in the aisle of that cabin, in the middle of an aircraft that belonged to a company I had spent 20 years building. She was still smiling. She genuinely believed she had won. I've thought about it for 40 years, I said. Ground the plane. Nobody flies tonight. And I want everything from that cabin camera preserved before anyone touches it. That was the moment it all ended. Not just for her. For almost every person who had been in on it. But to understand how one phone call took down half a company in a single evening, you have to go back to that morning, when nobody on that jet knew who I was, including, in a strange way, me. That morning began at 4:50 in a dark kitchen, the way most of my mornings did. I stood at the counter with a cup of coffee I was not drinking, looking at a photograph stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a little airplane. In the photograph, a woman in a gray cleaning uniform stood in the lobby of an office tower at night, mop bucket beside her, chin lifted like she owned the marble floor she had just cleaned. That was my mother, Della. She had been gone 6 years, and I still talked to her in that kitchen every morning like she could hear me. She raised me alone in a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of a city that never expected much from either of us. She cleaned offices downtown from 8 at night until 4 in the morning, then came home and made me breakfast before school like she had slept a full night in a bed instead of catching 20 minutes on a bus. She used to point up at those glass towers and say, "One day you're going to walk into a building like that through the front door, and nobody's going to ask you why you're there." She did not live to see it, but I did it. I built a logistics and mobility company called Meridian out of a single leased truck and a spreadsheet I ran on a computer I bought secondhand. 20 years later, Meridian moved freight, people, and data across the country, and that year we had just closed the biggest acquisition in our history. We had bought a private aviation firm called Crest Aviation Group, a company that operated a small fleet of business jets, so that Meridian could finally have its own flight division instead of renting one. That is the part that matters. On paper, as of 11 days before that morning, every aircraft that Crest operated belonged to my company, including the one I was about to board. I had a flaw, though. I have several, but this is the one my chief of staff warned me about constantly. His name was Tomas Reyes, and he had been with me 11 years. That morning he called me while I was still in the car heading to the private terminal, and I could hear the worry in his voice before he even said hello. "You're really doing this," he said. "You're flying out to Crest headquarters on one of their planes, without telling their people who you are." "I want to see how they actually treat people," I said. "Not the show they'll put on when they know the owner is watching. You learn more in 1 honest hour than in 100 polished meetings. Naomi, you do this everywhere. You ride in the back of your own delivery trucks. You wait in your own customer service lines. One of these days it's going to blow up in your face." "Then I'll learn something," I said, and I laughed, because I truly did not believe it would. I want to be honest about who I was that morning, because the woman who boarded that plane and the woman who made that phone call were not entirely the same person. I was proud of being invisible. I liked walking into rooms where no one knew my name. I told myself it was humility. Really, it was a kind of armor. If nobody knew who I was, nobody could take it away from me. I had spent my whole life being underestimated, and somewhere along the way I had started to enjoy it like a card I could play whenever I wanted. I thought that made me strong. It also meant I never announced myself. And that habit was about to collide with something ugly that had been living inside Crest Aviation for a very long time. The private terminal was quiet and beige and smelled like expensive coffee. I was dressed the way I always dress, in a navy suit with no logos, no jewelry except a small silver watch and the locket that held my mother's photograph. My hair was in a low bun. I carried 1 leather bag and a folder of documents. I looked, I suppose, like a woman who could have been anyone. An executive, An assistant. A stranger who had wandered in from the wrong door. There was a repositioning flight scheduled that morning, one of the Crest jets flying empty back to their home base, and I had arranged a seat on it through a quiet request that did not carry my name. The crew had been told only that an authorized passenger from the new parent company would be joining. They had not been told who. The first person I met was a young flight attendant standing at the base of the air stairs with a clipboard. Her name tag read Marisol. She had a dark ponytail and a nervous, careful kindness in the way she checked her list. When she saw me, she straightened up and smiled. And it was a real smile, the kind that costs nothing and means everything. "Good morning," she said. "Are you our passenger this morning?" "I am," I said. She looked at her clipboard. "I just have you listed as a corporate authorization. Can I get your name for the manifest?" Before I could answer, another voice came down the stairs like cold water. "I'll handle this, Marisol." The woman who stepped out of the cabin was the senior flight attendant. Her name, I would learn, was Danielle Prescott, and everyone called her Danny. She had a sharp blonde bob and a charcoal uniform with a little gold wings pin, and she wore a perfume I can still smell if I think about that day too long. She had a smile too, but hers did not reach anywhere near her eyes. It was the smile of a person who has already decided something about you and is only waiting for you to confirm it. "Ma'am," she said, "this is a private repositioning flight. It's not a commercial service. I'm going to need to see some identification and your authorization." "Of course," I said, and I reached into my folder for the document. She did not wait. She kept talking over me, her eyes moving across my suit, my bag, my face, doing that fast, unkind arithmetic that some people do without even knowing they are doing it. "Because I have to tell you," she went on, "we've had problems lately with people who think they can just walk onto these aircraft. We had a whole security incident last month. So I'm sure you understand that I can't just take someone's word for it. Here is the thing." I did understand the words she was saying. Security matters. Verification matters. If she had said them to everyone the same way, I would have handed her my paperwork and thanked her for being thorough. But she was not saying them to everyone the same way. I had watched, 2 minutes earlier, a man in a wrinkled polo walk up those same stairs with nothing but a coffee and a nod, and she had wished him a wonderful flight. I had heard her do it. I handed her the authorization letter. She glanced at it for half a second, the way you glance at something you have already decided is fake. "This doesn't have a photo," she said. "This could be anybody's. There's a verification number at the bottom," I said calmly. "You're welcome to call it." "I don't have time to call numbers," she said. "We have a departure window." And there it was, the warning sign I should have paid attention to. Not her suspicion, her certainty. She was not confused about who I might be. She was certain about who I could not be. She could not picture a woman who looked like me being connected to a jet like this in any role except the ones she had already assigned to people who looked like me. Marisol, standing behind her, had gone very still. She caught my eye for just a moment, and in that look was an apology she did not have the power to say out loud. I made a decision then that I have replayed 1,000 times. I decided to stay invisible a little longer. I decided to board, to sit down, to watch. I told myself I was gathering information. Really, some stubborn part of me wanted to make her call that number and be wrong. I wanted the satisfaction of it. That was my pride, and my pride was about to cost a lot of people a great deal, some of whom deserved it and some of whom did not. "I'll take my seat," I said. "You can verify while we taxi." Danny stepped slightly into my path, not quite blocking me, just enough to remind me that in her mind this was her aircraft. "We'll see," she said. I climbed the stairs into a cabin of cream leather and walnut trim, 8 wide seats and a low ceiling and the particular hush that money buys. I chose a seat near the window, set my folder on the small table, and looked out at the tarmac where the sun was just starting to turn the concrete gold. I want to tell you that the rest of that flight was uneventful. It was not. Danny did not verify anything. I watched her walk to the front of the cabin, pick up the interphone, and speak quietly to the cockpit, and I watched her glance back at me twice while she did it. When Marisol came through offering water and coffee to the 4 passengers, Danny intercepted her before she reached my row. "She's fine," Danny said, loud enough for me to hear. "She doesn't need anything." I did need something. I had asked for water. Marisol froze between us, a young woman holding a bottle of water like it had suddenly become dangerous, and I saw her make the smallest choice. She set the water on my table anyway. "Here you go, ma'am," she said quietly. "Let me know if you need anything else." Danny's face tightened. That, I think, was the moment the day turned from ugly into something worse. Because now it was not only about me. Now there was a witness who had stepped out of line, and Danny was a person who could not stand to be stepped out of line for. For the next hour, the flight became a slow, quiet campaign. Danny checked my seatbelt twice when she checked no one else's. She informed me, in front of the other passengers, that my bag was improperly stowed, though it was stowed exactly like everyone else's. When I opened my folder to review documents, she appeared at my shoulder to tell me that photographing the cabin was strictly prohibited, though I was not photographing anything. I stayed calm. I have had a lot of practice staying calm. I answered her politely each time, which seemed to enrage her more, because I was not giving her the reaction that would justify the story she had already written in her head about who I was. And this is where I have to be fair to her, because I promised myself I would tell this honestly. Danny Prescott was not a cartoon villain. I learned later, when the investigation opened everything up, that she had been at Crest for 19 years. She had watched younger people get promoted over her. She had a final written warning in her file from 3 months earlier, after a passenger complaint, and she was terrified of losing the only career she had ever known. Warren Kessler, the man who owned Crest, ran a fear-based operation, and after that so-called security incident, management had told the crews to keep unauthorized people off repositioning flights and to take it seriously or lose their jobs. She was a frightened person who had been handed a small amount of power and a lot of pressure, and she used it the way frightened people with a little power often do. She used it against the person she felt safest using it against. None of that excuses what she did next. Understanding is not the same as excusing. But I did not want to pretend she was a monster, because monsters are easy. What happened on that plane was not the work of a monster. It was the work of an ordinary bitterness that had been fed for years and never once told no. We landed at Crest's home base a little after 10 in the morning. The other passengers gathered their things. Marisol opened the cabin door and the warm air came in. And I stayed in my seat, because I had one more thing to do before I revealed anything. And it was the thing that finally broke the day open. I took out my phone, and I opened the folder on it that held the internal Meridian file on the Crest acquisition. I wanted to check one detail before I walked into that building and started asking questions. I wanted to confirm a name I had half remembered from the due diligence documents. Danny saw the screen. She saw a corporate logo she recognized, the logo of the company that had just bought Crest, the company every single employee there was afraid of that month. And instead of understanding what that meant, her fear turned it into the worst possible story. "Are you recording?" she said, and her voice cracked with something close to panic. "Are you filming the crew? Give me that phone." "I'm not filming anything," I said. "This is a work document." "Give me the phone," she said again, and she reached for it. I pulled it back. That was all. I pulled my own phone away from a stranger who was trying to grab it out of my hand. And Danny Prescott, 19 years at Crest, one final warning in her file, terrified and cornered and certain, drew back her hand and slapped me across the face. The sound of it filled the whole cabin. For a moment nobody moved. Marisol had her hand over her mouth. The one passenger still gathering his bag had frozen halfway out of his seat. And Danny stood over me, breathing hard, and I watched her wait for me to become the thing she had already decided I was. She wanted me to scream. She wanted me to swing back. She wanted the story to become a story about an angry, unstable woman who had been rightfully removed from an aircraft, so that everything she had done for the last 2 hours would look justified. I did not give her that story. I sat very still. My cheek was on fire. My ears were ringing. And somewhere underneath the pain, 40 years of being underestimated went quiet and cold and clear, the way a lake goes still right before the temperature drops. I reached up, slowly, and I touched my mother's locket. Then I picked up my phone, the one she had just tried to take, and I made a call. "Grant," I said, when my chief operating officer answered. "I'm on the ground at Crest. I need you to do something for me right now." That was the 2 minutes. That was the phone call the whole story turns on. But it did not do what everyone expected it to do, and it did not do what Danny feared it would do, and it certainly did not go the way I planned. Because the person I called was the one person at Meridian who had the most to lose from the truth coming out. Grant Halvorson was my chief operating officer. He was 58, silver-haired, always in a gray suit, the kind of executive who could make a spreadsheet sound like a sermon. He had championed the Crest acquisition harder than anyone. It was his deal, his legacy, his bonus, and he had spent months telling the board it was clean. "Naomi," he said carefully, after I told him what had happened. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," I said. "Physically." "Grant," a senior member of the Crest crew, just put her hands on me. "There are witnesses. There's a cabin camera. I want it preserved." There was a pause on the line that lasted a half-second too long. And in that half-second, I heard something I did not expect to hear. I heard him calculating. "Okay," he said, in the smooth voice he used when he was managing me. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to keep this quiet, handle it internally, and make it right for you privately. The last thing we need, 11 days into the biggest acquisition in company history, is a public incident involving the crew. If this gets out, it could blow up the whole integration. The valuation, the retention agreements, all of it. Let me call Warren directly. He'll take care of this woman today, quietly, and we protect the deal." I sat in that cabin with my face still stinging, and I understood all at once that the slap was not the biggest problem I had. "Grant," I said slowly, "how did you know she's a woman?" Silence. I had said a member of the crew. I had not said her. I had not described her. But Grant already knew who I was talking about, which meant Grant already knew something about Danny Prescott or about Crest's crews that he had not put in any due diligence document I had ever read. "Naomi," he started. "Ground the aircraft," I said. "Nobody flies out on this tail number until I say so, and send me the due diligence file on Crest's HR complaints. The complete file. Not the summary you gave the board. The complete one. There's nothing in there you need to see," he said, and his voice had changed. The warmth was gone. What was left was a man protecting himself. "Then it won't be a problem to send it," I said, and I hung up. That was the true call. Not a call for revenge. A call that pulled one loose thread, and the whole garment started to come apart. Here is what I did not know yet, standing in that cabin, and what the next 72 hours would teach me. I did not know that 8 months earlier, a black businessman flying on a Crest charter had filed a formal complaint after a crew member, Danny Prescott, had demanded his identification 4 separate times, searched his bag without cause, and accused him in front of other passengers of being on the wrong flight. I did not know that Warren Kessler had made that complaint disappear with a small settlement and a non-disclosure agreement. And I did not know that when Meridian's team ran due diligence on Crest, Grant Halvorson had seen that settlement, understood exactly what it meant, and buried it because a discrimination pattern would have lowered the price he was paying and threatened the deal he had staked his reputation on. The slap did not create the scandal. The slap just turned the lights on in a room where something had been rotting for years. I got off that plane. Marisol followed me down the air stairs, and at the bottom she caught my sleeve, her hand shaking. "Ma'am," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I should have said something on the plane. I should have stopped her. You gave me a bottle of water when she told you not to," I said. "You have no idea how much that mattered." Her eyes filled. "There's a camera in the cabin," she said quickly, quietly, like she was confessing. Audio and video. It records the whole flight. But I heard the captain on the interphone after we landed. Someone told him to pull the card. I think they're going to erase it. I looked at this young woman who had every reason to keep her head down, who had a supervisor who would end her career for talking to me, and who was risking that career on the tarmac because she could not stand what she had seen. Marisol, I said, do you know where that card is right now? She nodded slowly. I need you to do something that might get you fired, I said, and I need you to trust that if it does, I will personally make sure you never regret it. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, I already grabbed it. It's in my pocket. I didn't know why. I just knew they shouldn't have it. I have hired thousands of people over the years. I have interviewed executives with degrees from every school you can name. And I have never been more sure that I was looking at the best person in a company than I was in that parking lot. Looking at a 26-year-old flight attendant holding a memory card in a shaking hand because she could not make herself do the wrong thing. We walked into the Crest headquarters together, and that is when Warren Kessler appeared. Warren was exactly what you would picture. Ruddy face, golf tan, blazer with gold buttons, a handshake he deployed like a weapon. He came around the reception desk with his arms already spread in apology, because Grant had clearly called him the second I hung up. Ms. Cole, he boomed. Naomi, I am mortified, absolutely mortified. This is not who we are. Danny Prescott is a rogue employee. She's been a problem for years, and I promise you she is done. Terminated. Today. This ends here. And there it was again. The instinct to hand me one person's head on a plate so that the system that made her could keep running. Fire Danny, sign a check, make the CEO feel avenged, and bury everything else exactly like they buried it 8 months ago. They thought they knew who I was. They thought I was a person who wanted a single villain punished so I could feel better and move on. They did not understand that I had spent my whole life being the person a system decides to sacrifice so it does not have to change. Mr. Kessler, I said, I don't want Danny Prescott fired. He blinked. Behind him, I could see the relief starting to spread across his face, because he thought I was going to let it all go. I want an investigation, I said, an independent one. I want every complaint filed against this company in the last 5 years. I want the settlement you signed 8 months ago with a passenger named. I already know the initials. And I want the name of every person at Crest and at Meridian who knew about it and chose to keep it quiet. The relief drained out of his face like someone had pulled a plug. Now, I said, the camera card from this morning's flight. Where is it? Warren's mouth opened and closed. We can pull that for you, of course. It takes some time to locate. That's interesting, I said. Because your captain radioed to have it pulled 20 minutes ago. Was that to preserve it for me, or to destroy it before I asked? The silence in that lobby was the most honest thing that had been said all day. I spent the next 3 days at Crest, and I did not do it quietly, and that was new for me. For the first time in my career, I stopped hiding. I walked into that building as exactly who I was. I put my name on the door of a conference room, and I invited every crew member, every mechanic, every dispatcher, every gate agent to come talk to me, one at a time, with the promise that nothing they said would be held against them and everything they said would be protected. I brought in an outside investigator, a former federal attorney with no loyalty to anyone in that building, and I gave her full access. The stories came in slowly at first, and then all at once, the way water comes through a crack in a dam. There was the passenger from 8 months ago whose complaint had been buried. There was a Crest dispatcher, a black man named Andre, who had been passed over for a supervisor role 4 times while less qualified people were promoted, and who had stopped complaining because complaining had a cost and nothing ever changed. There was a young pilot who had heard Danny and 2 other senior crew members joke about which passengers looked like they belonged and which ones did not, and who had reported it, and whose report had gone into a drawer and died there. And there was Grant. The investigator found the email. It was short. Grant had written it to himself, essentially, a note in the due diligence system flagging the settlement, and then a second note 11 days later marking it resolved and non-material, which was a lie that saved him from an awkward conversation with the board and protected the price of his deal. He had known. He had known there was a discrimination problem inside Crest, and he had let me, his CEO, a black woman, board one of their aircraft alone and anonymous, and he had said nothing because saying something might have slowed down his deal. When I read that email, I sat alone in that conference room for a long time. I want to tell you I felt rage. I did not quite. What I felt was grief. Because Grant had worked for me for 9 years. I had trusted him. I had defended him to the board. And he had looked at the numbers and looked at me and decided the numbers were worth more. That was the betrayal that hurt. Danny slapped me and it stung for an hour. Grant sold my safety for a spreadsheet and it changed how I trusted people for the rest of my life. Now I have to tell you about the moral part because this is the part one still think about. Once the investigation was finished, I had the power to end a lot of careers with a few sentences. The board would have followed me anywhere by then. The recording Marisol saved had made sure of that. On the audio you could hear everything, the way Danny had spoken to me, the slap, the sound of it. There was no argument left to have. I held every card. And I discovered that having all the power did not make the choices easy. It made them heavier. The easiest person to destroy was Danny Prescott. She had hit me. She was already gone the moment her hand moved. But when the investigator interviewed her, something happened that I did not expect. First, Danny lied. She said I had been aggressive, that I had refused to identify myself, that she had feared for her safety. Then the investigator played the recording. And Danny, hearing her own voice in that cabin, hearing what she actually sounded like, stopped talking. She put her face in her hands. And she said, so quietly the recording almost missed it, "That's not who I thought I was." I read the transcript of that interview 4 times. Because here is the truth I had to sit with. Danny Prescott was responsible for what she did. Completely. She raised her hand and she chose. But she had also spent 19 years inside a company that rewarded exactly the instincts she showed me, that never once corrected her, that settled a complaint about her behavior and then told her nothing, that put her on a final warning for the wrong reasons and left the actual rot in place. She was the fruit of that tree. And I had the chance to burn down the whole orchard or just pick off the one piece of fruit everyone could see. I did not want mercy to be the same thing as a cover-up. That was the trap. Warren had offered me a version of mercy that was really just burial, fire one person, protect the system. I refused that. But I also did not want justice to be the same thing as cruelty, where I ended a frightened woman and let the powerful men who built the machine walk away richer. So I tried to do the harder thing, which was to be exact. Here is what one phone call and the 3 days that followed it actually did. Danny Prescott's employment ended, but not with the tidy, silent firing Warren wanted. Her conduct went into a real record, the recording preserved, the pattern documented, so that it could never again be quietly settled and hidden. But I also did something Warren never would have. In her exit, I made sure the report named the environment that shaped her, the training that never came, the complaints that were buried, so that she was accountable for her hand and the company was accountable for the years. She was not made the sole villain of a story that had many authors. I do not know if she ever understood that. I did not do it for her. I did it because a lie that scapegoats one person is still a lie, and I was done with lies. Warren Kessler lost far more than an employee. The investigation into the buried settlement and the pattern of complaints triggered a review of the entire acquisition. The retention package that would have kept him rich and in charge of his own division under Meridian was gone. He left the company he had founded, and he left it with his name attached to exactly the thing he had spent money to keep hidden. His career, the one he thought he was protecting when he tried to hand me Danny's head that first morning, ended because he could not imagine that I wanted the truth more than I wanted a scapegoat. And Grant Halvorson, my chief operating officer of 9 years, the man whose deal it was, I did not call him. I flew back and I sat across a table from him, the way my old cold open promised you, except the table was in my own boardroom and the plane was long grounded. I put the email in front of him, the one where he marked a discrimination settlement as non-material. I watched him read his own words, and I gave him the chance to explain because I owed 9 years that much. He said, "Naomi, I was protecting the company. I was protecting you. Do you have any idea what a scandal like this does to a valuation?" "You weren't protecting me," I said. "You put me on that plane knowing what those crews were like, and you said nothing because a warning to me was a risk to your deal. You didn't protect me from anything. You just made sure that if it happened quietly." He did not have an answer for that. There was not one. Grant Halvorson left Meridian that week. Not with the public humiliation he feared, because I am not built to enjoy destroying people, even people who betrayed me. But he left, because I could not trust a man who had already shown me the exact price at which he would sell my dignity, and it turned out that price was a slightly better quarter. So yes, one phone call ended nearly every career that had touched that rot. But I need you to understand what actually ended those careers. It was not my anger. My anger would have burned out in a day. What ended them was the truth, which they had all spent so much energy hiding that they never learned how to survive it. Now let me tell you about the person the story is really about, because it is not Danny, and it is not Grant. It is Marisol Vega, the young flight attendant who put a bottle of water on my table when she was told not to, who palmed a memory card off an aircraft because she knew, without being able to explain why, that the wrong people wanted it gone, who followed me down the air stairs to apologize for a thing that was never her fault. When the dust settled, I offered her a job. Not the same job. I asked her to help build something. Meridian created a new flight division, out of what used to be Crest, and I needed people who understood the culture we were leaving behind and could tell the difference between a rule that protects passengers and a rule that protects prejudice. Marisol became part of the team that wrote the new standards. The dispatcher, Andre, who had been passed over 4 times, ran the operation. And I changed too. That is the part one am least comfortable telling you, because it means admitting I was part of the problem I was so proud of exposing. For 20 years I had moved through my own company invisibly, telling myself it was humility. Riding in the back of trucks, waiting in my own lines, boarding my own jets without a name. I thought it made me a better leader, that it kept me close to the ground. But the morning Danny Prescott slapped me, I understood something I had been avoiding my whole career. My invisibility was not only humility. It was hiding. I stayed nameless because being nameless felt safe, and because some scared part of me still believed that if people knew who I was, they would find a reason to take it away, the way the world had always found reasons. But a leader who hides cannot see what her silence permits. My quiet made me feel humble, and my quiet let a culture like Crest's exist under my own roof, because I was too busy protecting my armor to walk into a building and say clearly out loud, "This is who I am and this is what I will not tolerate." So I stopped hiding. I put my name on things. I walked into rooms as myself, not out of ego, but because I finally understood that when you have the power to protect people, staying invisible is not humility. It is abandonment. I keep the photograph of my mother on my desk now, the one from the refrigerator, the one where she stands in that marble lobby at night with her chin up like she owns the floor she cleaned. She used to say that one day I would walk through the front door of a building like that and nobody would ask me why I was there. She was right about the building. She was wrong about the question. People will always ask. The world still looks at a woman like me and does its fast, unkind arithmetic. What she could not have known, because she never got to see it, is that the answer to the question was never about proving I belonged. The answer was refusing to disappear so that no one could be made small in my name again. Danny Prescott thought she was defending an aircraft from a woman who did not belong on it. What she never understood, in all her 19 years of certainty, is that she was standing in a cabin that belonged to that woman, in a company that belonged to that woman, hitting a person whose only real crime was letting her believe, for one morning too long, that some people are exactly what the world expects them to be. I let her believe it because my pride enjoyed the trap. That is my part and I own it. But I will tell you what I learned, and it is the thing I want you to carry out of this story. The people who assume the worst about you are showing you exactly who they are. You never have to prove them wrong. You only have to refuse to become the small, silent version of yourself that their assumptions were built to create. The most powerful thing I did that day was not the phone call. It was sitting still with a burning cheek and choosing not to hand them the story they had already written. Dignity is not loud, but it does not disappear either. And when you stop hiding it, it turns out to be the one thing no one can slap out of you. So let me leave you with this. If you had been sitting in that cabin, watching it all happen, at what exact moment would you have stopped being invisible and said your name out loud? And be honest with yourself, because I waited too long, and I am still not sure I would do it any faster today. Tell me in the comments. I read them, and I promise you I am listening.